Welcome all of my energetic beings to Healing Pathways by Pathway Light by Corey. My name is Corey Newlieb and I am your host. Today we are going to be talking about art pathways and how we can use art to heal. And I have my guest star, Becca Miller, here with me. She is a photographer and artist. She sells her stuff on Etsy. You can find her at Fruit of Persephone. And if you are around Georgia and have any photography needs, she's also available for that as well. So yeah, hello, Becca. How are you?
Hello, I'm good.
So, I wanted to have you specifically on this podcast because when it comes to art and healing with art, there's really no one else that came to mind other than you. We've known each other for many, many, many years at this point since I was in 8th grade. So we're looking at like almost 10 years at this point, girl.
And I scared you.
Yeah. You did. You did. You scared me on our first interaction. And that was an interesting one because we were in band and you were just very intimidating. I don't know why. I think it's because you were the only trumpet player there and I was the other trumpet player coming on, and I was like, okay, there's a little bit of competition because you know how trumpet players are. We all have a little bit of an ego. So
Fight.
yeah. So I'm very happy to have you here and to be able to have this podcast done with you because I just think the amount of information and things that you can bring to the table are very much so enlightening, and it's an overwhelming amount of information that you can bring. Especially like with your travel sense. I mean, you've been to how many places now?
A lot.
Yeah, I can't even name them. You've seen some amazing things, and that's another reason why I wanted to have you here, because art can portray itself in many different ways, especially through various cultures, and you've seen those various cultures firsthand. Yes. Which is a very beautiful thing. But part of the reason I wanted to do this about art, or this podcast about art, is because there's so many ways that it can help us heal. I mean, the colors, when we go into color psychology, their expression, their mood, there's so many different outlets that you can use to kind of pull art and, portray your piece of things out into the world. And it's just so multifaceted. There's so many different ways. You can sculpt, you can paint, you can draw, you can just like throw lines on a paper and smooth out like the sharp edges, you know what I mean? Like there's so many different ways to art. I mean, you can throw paint on a wall, and if that's what the expression of your mood is, that's what it is. I really wanted to go into a little bit of the history of art. There was a couple of things that you had sent me, a couple of pieces from history, but the main thing that I wanted to get into it, like the main reason why I wanted to get into the history of it, is because it portrays just how much art has been used like in healing throughout the years. So I mean, we look back to the Paleolithic age, the Mesopotamian age, ancient Egyptian, all of them have art that is portraying something. They all vary in their styles and the way that they're portraying the art, but the main thing is they're depicting something, whether it be religious, personal, emotional, analytical. It's always a depiction of what that artist is attempting to convey and what that artist is holding deep kind of within them. Using your travel experience and focus of study, do you believe that historical art depictions can influence the path one takes to healing emotionally? So looking at history of art and those historical depictions, can we use that to help us heal?
Yeah, I think you definitely can. I think regardless of what time period any of it is from, you can find connections with how you're feeling now, which I feel like is important in your healing process, because if somebody else feels the same way as you, regardless of what time period it is, like it's a lot easier to cope and understand you're not alone and kind of take that first step of like, okay, other people have taken this first step before. I can take this first step and I can do this. And even if it's not specifically how you were feeling, like that, the second painting that I sent you, Raft of Medusa, One of the big things that we analyzed about that in school was actually that every single person on that boat has a different facial expression.
Oh,
Every single person is going through a different emotion as that boat is sinking.
oh. See, I did not pick up on that. So, for those of you who are going to be listening on Spotify, because on YouTube I'm going to be posting the images up on YouTube just so like they can see it. But for those of you listening on Spotify, if you want to look up the image that we're referring to, it's called The Raft of the Medusa by Theodore Gericault. It was produced like 1818, 1819, from at least the studies that I've done, and it depicts about I don't know how many people are actually there, but it tells a story of about 150 men who were placed on a raft, and we'll go into a little bit more of like what the story is, but of that raft, only 10 survived. So you can imagine the kind of carnage that had to have occurred for the numbers to go from 150 to 10 people that had survived that. So it depicts carnage, death, desperation, hopelessness. You know, there's really not much that it doesn't depict as far as like a negative or a dark emotion.
Yeah, and the artist did a great job like depicting all the different emotions on different faces. Like he didn't just take one face and put it so every single person can connect with at least one of those faces. Like I know exactly how that person's feeling right now.
Yeah. And even in the spaces where the people are looking away and reaching out, you can still get a sense of what they're feeling based on their body language. He was really able to depict those emotions and that deep carnage through that body language that, he drew and that he depicted through that art. And we can really see, that level of desperation sometimes that we feel, even if we're not on, a raft in the middle of the ocean looking out like for help. I mean, sometimes we feel that way, you know what I mean?
Yeah, I was gonna
And
say sometimes you do feel like you're in a raft in the middle of the ocean.
exactly, we're drifting on this like floating piece of wood that's just been left over for us, and we're like, okay, what now? So it can really, we can start to relate to that piece of art in a very deep way, in a sense of like, okay, my desperation is valid, one, and two, other people have felt it and they've taken that and used it as power, right? So he took
Yep.
this and he transmuted it into this very powerful piece, so powerful that at the time they didn't even want to portray it up. They wanted to take it down. They did not want to have it up. They wanted to remove it. And they did for a period of time until it came, back to surface a little bit later in time.
Yeah.
The other thing that I wanted to bring up is art therapy. And the reason that I bring this up is because when we look into the history of art and how it can heal us, it reflects itself through art therapy very heavily. So art therapy has typically been recognized medicinally since the mid 20th century, around about 1940, but it has been used to heal since long before then. So ancient meditative states were once considered a form of art, and understanding what conditions or emotions others have had to endure can give you a sense of perspective, even if you yourself are not creating the art. So when we're talking about art therapy, we're talking about not only creating the art, but analyzing and interpreting other pieces of artwork, kind of like we're doing a little bit with these two pieces that we have today, because with the Raft of Medusa, we're also going to be talking about Judith beheading Holofernes. And specifically, we're referring to the piece that was created, or how would you say that? My brain is blinking.
Created, I would say.
Yeah,
Created, produced. Her name was Artemisia Gentileschi, is how you pronounce that.
thank you.
But yeah, she was one of the first females to ever be kind of known for painting with her own name, not a male name, not, some sort of ruse to make it seem like it wasn't a girl. Like she was one of the first to really get out there. Her dad was also a painter, so when you see like just Gentileschi, it could be her, it could be her dad. And she studied under quite a few different painters, and part of one of them that she studied under is actually the reason that there is so much emotion in that piece. Is he was not a good person. So
Yeah. And we're talking about Tassie when we're referring to that person, right? Or yeah. So with this depiction is one that I think a lot of people can relate to.
Mhm.
Especially, and I hate to say it, but nowadays sexual assault is something that's brought to the forefront much more often and heavily, as it should be, because it needs to be addressed and it needs to be something that we've changed. And part of the reason is because, we look at this piece that was created, I don't have the date up in front of me, 1600s.
Yeah.
Like 1600s, this piece was created, and we're dealing with some of the same types of problems that she's trying to depict in this piece today.
Yeah.
And it again reflects how we can look at history and know that we're not alone. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
There are others that have had to endure this, and you know what? They had to endure it a lot worse in the manner. And not to minimize anybody's experiences, because everyone's valid in their own experiences, but
yeah, they had no resources, they had no support, they had no nothing. And granted, we have limited resources, but we do have resources.
Exactly. That's exactly what I'm trying to get to, because for them it was a lot harder, if not impossible, to heal through or after those kinds of things, and they just kind of had to live with it. They experienced it and then they lived with it, because if they tried to deal with it, it became much worse for them. Exactly. So today, we having all those resources, it makes it not easier to heal, because it's never an easy process, but it makes it more accessible. It makes it within arm's reach. And especially,
and you don't feel as isolated. Like, you're not alone. There's other people that have gone through it. You're not gonna blame yourself as much as they did back then, because then it was always the girl's fault. It didn't matter.
Yep. Always. And especially looking at this specific piece, so the piece that again we're referring to is Judith beheading Holofernes, originally by Caravaggio, and the piece is actually a depiction from a biblical sense, a biblical book. I don't know what specific book it was, but it depicts Judith beheading Holofernes. Judith was a young woman from Jewish city Bethulia who beheads Assyrian general Holofernes. So Holofernes at the time saw Judith and became so entranced with her beauty that he is said to have drank way more than he ever did before. He was determined to, how do I put this? He was determined. Yes, we'll use that. He was determined to command her, essentially, and she wanted nothing to do with it. So when he became so drunk that he had pretty much passed out, Judith, with one other woman, which I didn't.
It's her maid.
Her maid, thank you, because I wasn't able to find the information on who that was. But they essentially hold him down and they behead him. They take his head right off. And the first depiction by Caravaggio is not as gruesome or impactful, I would say, at least in my opinion. One of the
main differences that everybody always points out is actually the state the maid is in. She's a lot more into the actual act of it than just kind of helping, being on the side, kind of supporting Judith, whereas that's what she's doing in Caravaggio's, whereas this one, she's on top of Holofernes. She's 100% in there helping doing everything that, Judith needs her to do. It kind of shows, Gentileschi kind of went more of a, female helping another female, like female empowerment kind of move.
Yeah.
Whereas Caravaggio was just, yeah, she's in the background because she's a maid and that's where she belongs, kind of thing.
Yeah. And I also think the way that she interpreted the influence of God in this piece, she really used more colors to try and tell that story of it. And she also added, I don't know if you saw this, she added a bracelet onto her piece, and that bracelet actually has a depiction of Artemis, which is the god of chastity and the hunt. So she added that on there, to even like develop that further layer of being guided by the divine. And especially with that color scheme, she added that like almost amber gold color scheme, which is very often associated with, God and the Bible and modern religion. So, and not even just modern religion, but religion in general, it's been associated with that for many, 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 many years. So she really incorporated more color into her piece, whereas Caravaggio, if you see, it's lacking really in that like color depiction of everything, and really lacks like also the like details that she puts in, because she puts in just so much detail, especially into the blood of like the knife going through, that it is almost hard to look at. And like with the other painting, both of them were like put away. They didn't want to be seen, and they were tucked away in like a far corner until early, what was it, 20th century, when we pulled them out of that corner and brought them to light for everyone to see.
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah. And again, we can see how that in itself is a reflection of what we've done to people who have experienced any level of sexual assault. We almost push them back to a corner.
Don't think about it.
Don't see it, don't think about it, it doesn't exist, right? And that's not what we need to do. We need to bring it to the forefront so we can see it, we can process it, we can deal with it, and we can address it at a systemic level, which is really another piece that this, like, artist was trying to convey within this piece of Judith beheading Holofernes. Now, we've talked so much about how much detail she put into it, but can we talk a little bit like about why she put so much detail into it? Because the story about how she was able to connect to it is more of what's impactful for me, because she took her story and she tried to heal her piece of her story through this art depiction. So Judith kind of represented Artemisia in a way that she was able to connect with her almost on like a parallel sense. So Artemisia, when she was young, was raped by artist Agostino Tassi, and Agostino Tassi was actually one of her father's really good friends, and was also one of the people that helped to teach her a lot of her art skills, as well as her father. So as per the tradition of the time, when something like that is to occur, the assailant, in this case Tassi, traditionally would have to marry the girl. Otherwise, she would be, deemed unworthy of marriage. She would be considered, a whore. And I want to preface this with saying none of that is right by any means, but at the time it was normal. So nobody took a second look at that. And we hear that today and we're like, oh my God. But to them, it was normal. So her father, mad at Tassi himself, attempted to take legal action against Tassi. During the court processes, Artemisia went after Tassi with a knife and attempted to kill him. So I don't know what what the actual court decision was, or like what happened because she tried to attack him. However, she certainly was able to channel all of that anger that she felt from, one, the assault itself, and two, the court and the way that, the government had kind of failed her in their sense of like law and justice. And she took that and she put it directly into the art piece. And that's really, to me, what gave it more of that impact. Is she had that personal connection to it, and it wasn't just a biblical story to her.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and I think it's also really interesting to look at her work and look at his work, because he was primarily a landscape and seascape artist. And I feel like if you look after that whole thing happened, she kind of went away from that style. Like, she did not really do a lot of landscapes ever, which is also, I think, really interesting if you just look at it from a kind of analyzing point of view. Like, clearly it stayed with her for a really long time.
Yeah, very much so. I mean, because it almost like it depicts more of like the bed than like the original photo does, and there's really no backdrop to it. So exactly, like when we're looking at the landscape, she had that image like almost burned into her brain.
Yeah, exactly.
With this like depiction, Judith was depicted actually as a chosen one of God, as it was said she was to be guided by God's hand and given the strength to behead Holofernes. I mean, when we're looking at the piece itself, she even like has wrinkles on her hand, and that was something like on, if you see her left hand as she's trying to like hold his head there, the kind of strength that she had to have had, it's said to make that smooth, swipe. It's said that she had to have had God's hand in that strength. And that's another reason why she kind of depicts that bracelet on her left hand, because she needed that strength of God to help, kind of pull or push her through that. And that's where she found her kind of strength as well. Judith, in a sense, that's where she found her strength to stand up to Holofernes. And I think that's another piece that we can look at it too, because people, if you believe in religion and you are religious by nature, looking at this piece can really give you strength, seeing how it was able to guide and give Judith strength. Now, I'm not saying go off and behead the person that is, giving you trouble.
No, we're definitely not sending that message.
No, I'm just saying that, it can depict how sometimes looking at God, or whoever you view as your God, or whatever your religious belief is, can also give you a lot of strength too, as many have had to do before you as well. Because ultimately this podcast is about healing. So I do kind of want to relate everything back to that. And that is why we're going over this, is, there's just so much that we can learn and use to heal within art. Another thing that I also wanted to point out too, and I read this because I looked over a few different articles on this. Judith beheading or slaying Holofernes is also an indication to women's power to overcome the power that men hold over them. Because, for centuries now, men have been,
That is a very common theme of art, especially around this time and shortly after it. There's a lot of art made mostly by women, obviously, in that time period, where it's all about them overcoming in their own little ways the power that everybody has had on them for so long. No voting, no jobs, no any of that stuff. This all kind of starts to come into play in art around this time. She was one of the first ones to do it, but there's a lot after her. She kind of opened the door of hey, you can do this. And after that, it kind of took off.
Which is, again, very much so depictive or representative of how healing art can be, right? Because not only was she able to use this piece to heal from herself, but she was able to take her art in general and her other pieces as well and use that to help others heal going forward. She opened that door for others to be able to step through. And that's really the importance of art when it comes to healing, because it's not just healing ourselves. It's not just taking our own things and then putting it onto a piece of paper or sculpting it into something, or I don't know, there's just so many different forms of art. I can't think of it right now. But it really is taking that and putting it out there. So one, other people can heal from it and learn from it, but two, you can inspire other people to heal as well. It's not just having that knowledge that, you know, looking at that piece and having the knowledge of it that allows them to heal and say, oh, okay, somebody else was in this position, but it can also potentially, you know, inspire someone to say, you know what, I have a piece of art in me that I need to put out into this world, because that's how powerful that is for me. So I think that's such a beautiful thing. So we kind of went into the Raft of Medusa like earlier, but I didn't really like tell the whole story of it. But I do want to tell a little bit more of the story now, because I want people to like have that connection. And part of the reason why I wanted to start with the other one that you had sent me, or with Judith slaying Holofernes, is because the original piece was done by who was it again? Oh god, I had it here.
Caravaggio?
Yes, so the original piece was done by Caravaggio, which kind of inspired some of the work of Géricault. So Géricault kind of used some of Caravaggio's techniques in his piece to kind of depict some of the horrific acts that have taken place on that raft. So the story of the Raft of Medusa was, there was a ship in France that had a bunch of governors, sailors, colonists, and other men of the colony at that time, and that ship was called Medusa. Among its journey, the boat got run aground on a sand patch and could not be fixed. So what they did is they had 6 rafts that they took, or lifeboats rather, I should call them lifeboats, because they had 6 lifeboats that they took all the governors and the high-ranking officials and their families, and they stuck them on those boats and they sent them all to safety. And the remaining about 150 people were placed on a small raft, of which only 10 survived. So that small raft was eventually saved by a ship called Argus. They saved 15 people, but of which only 10 survived. So the 10 that survived came back, and they were able to tell stories of, you know, murders, cannibalism, you know, suicides, all these kind of horrific acts, because when you're on that kind of raft, to go from 150 to 10, I mean, that kind of drop, something bad had to have happened. And
yeah, even someone just as simple as getting in an argument and going, bye, you know, just a little shove.
Yeah, yep. And you can see just like the kind of effect that it has. In the front, there seems to be, you know, the bottom left hand of the picture, there's almost like a boy who is, you know, completely naked, and his father, or what seems to be his father, or what's known to be his father, has one arm over him as he's, you know, has his hand or his head in his hand, just in complete sorrow. And you can see just how defeated he is, and he's one of the few people that are actually facing the viewer. And with him facing us, it depicts a ton of grief. I mean, you can just see it. He is just broken. He's got his son in his hands, just lying over him. He doesn't want to let him go, you know, even despite him literally having a foot in the water. He does not want to let his son go. And he's just facing all of that, you know, grief all at once, and he's just kind of broken. He's not even desperate for help.
Another thing that we kind of analyzed in school with that painting too was he's one of the only ones not facing the direction they're going in, which is
Yes.
another, like, he's not looking forward to the future anymore. He is 100% back turned on the future. He is in his grief, and that's where he's going to stay.
Yes. Yep.
Yes.
He doesn't care about what's coming forward. He doesn't care if there's potential help. Everyone else is reaching out, screaming for desperation, waving flags around, looking for someone, and he's like, oh, okay, yeah, whatever, my son's dead. That's all I care about.
Yep. What comes, comes.
Yep. And I think a lot of people can relate to that. You know, losing a family member, whether it be, you know, a dad, brother, or sister, is hard enough, but losing a child, the person that you were meant to protect in this world, it is devastating. And I haven't personally experienced that. I pray that I never do. I don't have any children now, but if I do have children, I pray I never have to feel that, because it is a devastating feeling. And this piece really depicts how debilitating it can be to your sense of hope for the future
And your
and
sense of self too, because if you, depending on, how close you are, obviously, to the person that you lose, like a lot of people do say, I feel like I lost a piece of myself. So then you're struggling not only with the loss of a person, but you also feel like you lost a sense of yourself as well. And that can take sometimes even twice as long to get back versus, the grieving process of losing a physical object instead of something that's just like inside of you.
yeah, yep, absolutely. Part of the other reason why, at least from what I read, we have interpreted the people having their backs turned to the viewers is to really emphasize their need for assistance and their need for desperation. I also kind of thought to like the spiritual sense, because when we look at spirituality, when we look at our backs, that's our subconscious. That's the pieces of ourselves that is there but we can't see, but it exists there. And it can also represent our shadow self. And it's when we're at our most susceptible, it's our most vulnerable side of ourselves, and that's reflecting back at the viewer, really just showing how desperate, how vulnerable they really are. And it's also highlighting those who aren't alive, because a lot of the faces that we see in this depiction are those of the dead. We see people who are alive, but we're seeing a lot of people who are dead, and we're seeing their faces. And that's part of the reason, at least in my opinion, why he chose to depict the people looking away, is because it emphasizes those who aren't able to look forward, who aren't able to look and be desperate. They're just stuck looking up or floating away because they've died. They aren't given that opportunity.
Another thing that I think is interesting, that I personally just think is interesting, I'm not sure if this has ever been actually talked about from an artistic standpoint, is none of the people on this boat painted this. This is painted from their stories, from the stories that we've heard. So that's how graphic and how traumatized they were. This is the story that came out of it. This is the image that somebody whose job is to take words and make an image out of. This is what he made.
Yeah. And think about it. He only had 10 people to base this off of. He took stories and accounts of 10 people and made this. And let me just tell you, if you gather 10 people in a room who have shared one experience and try and make one art piece out of it, to be able to show everyone's emotion is extremely difficult. I mean, most people, I struggle to show my emotion through a piece of artwork, never mind 10 other people's emotions. So you can really see how much this had to have impacted Jericho for him to be able to take all of those emotions and not only harness and process them and what that might have existed and felt like for those people, and then put it on a piece of artwork that had to have impacted him in some way. It had to have. And it probably gave him a sense of perspective too, because he didn't have to endure that. So it probably gave him a sense of perspective of, oh, okay, maybe what I'm doing here isn't all that bad. I haven't eaten maybe for a day or two, but that's okay because I wasn't on a raft where people were eating me. You know what I mean? Give and take here. That's more what we're talking about. So it's what can we learn from this piece? And really a large piece of that is perspective.
Yeah, and there's actually a really good quote that shows up on my Pinterest sometimes that says something along the lines of, being an artist or making art is simultaneously healing a wound and reopening it over and over and over again, because you have to be able to open it to make the artwork, but making the artwork is healing it. So you're basically in this cycle of opening it, and then like parts of it will be closed because you get that part out, but then there's still stuff in there. So then you're just constantly reopening an old wound, but you're healing it at the same time.
I think of, and I know it sounds gross, but I think of like a cyst. Like when you need to get a cyst removed, if it's a large cyst, like if you look on like Dr. Pimple Popper.
Yeah, you have to get the wall out or it'll just keep coming back.
Yes, you have to get the wall out. And sometimes if it's so big, they can't like close the hole. They have to pack the hole in, let it heal, then go back, repack it, let it heal a little bit more. Then they have to stitch it up. So again, we're talking about having to constantly go in and reopen that wound to let it heal just a little bit more.
Yeah, and if you miss even a little piece, a little tiny piece,
it comes back. Yep. And also, let's talk about when in the process of doing all of that, if it's that deep, it's going to leave a scar no matter what. If you heal, even if you heal, there's still going to be a little bit of the scar left, and you're always going to have that there to look back and say, hey, that was a piece or that was a time period in my life.
And I overcame that, and all I have left is this scar.
Exactly. And that's kind of what artwork is. I guess you can compare that in a way, is artwork is a scar. It's a scar. And I think of in tarot, the Magician is the second card in the major arcana, and the major arcana refers to like our life's journey. It's called the Fool's Journey. It's the second card, but it's actually the first step in the major arcana. And the Magician, it talks about our willpower and our internal state and manifesting that internal, willpower and our internal state into the physical realm. And I think a large part of art in general is encompassing that magician kind of energy in there, because we're taking everything internally that we're feeling, all this potentially information. Like in Jericho's case, he took information, internalized that, and then transmuted it into power that he then portrayed onto a piece of art that is then followed through for now 200 years for us to analyze. You know what I mean? It carries. Yeah. So staying on the theme of like art in history and how we've been able to use that to heal. So art has been used since the beginning of time to depict periods in history of significance, either to them or to the collective. So from caveman drawings to modern statues that we are currently erecting, all of them tell a story. All of them have, some type of significance that we're trying to portray, whether it be something personal or something to the collective. And part of that too is we've been actually recently, in the past few years, we've been taking down statues and removing them, kind of because they're depicting history falsely. And I wanted to get, what was your opinion on that?
So I have a pretty lengthy opinion on just removing art in general, regardless of what kind it is, songs, movies, statues, like anything that someone has created, like in that time period, that is what that artist decided to make. And just because it is no longer true or no longer what we want to portray, like hiding it is the same as telling people that they can't have their own opinions. Like
I
that
get Big
artist
Brother energy.
felt, yes, Big Brother energy, exactly. Like one thing that really reminds me of that from a long time ago is all of the ancient Greek statues. And you know, I just went to Greece, so I just got reminded of this again. But so a lot of the Greek statues, males, for instance, are depicted naked. And the reason that they are depicted naked is because, specifically when they go into battle, they're depicted naked going into battle because they, it's shown that they're giving their all to their country. Like they are going in with their entire being and giving it to their country. They didn't actually go to war naked. That's not what they're trying to depict. They're depicting the vulnerability that these people had for their country when they went into war.
I was just thinking vulnerability.
Yes. And then, for instance, then when the Romans came and they introduced Catholicism to the Greek world, they went through and I mean this literally, broke off all of the penises on these statues because they thought they were indecent.
Huh.
And if you go back and look and you think about it, like that is then defacing the vulnerability that the Greeks were trying to show. They weren't trying to show, hey, here's a penis. They were trying to show, I am vulnerable. This is all of me. Here you go. And then because Catholicism constantly was changing and evolving around the Greeks at that time, they then went in and basically shoved their opinion on these people the same way that we're taking our statues down now is we have a different story to tell, and that automatically in like the Romans had made the Greek statues wrong because that doesn't stand for what they stand for. And because of that, now 9 out of 10 of the Greek statues that you can find in Greece, even though they're still standing, are missing pieces because people didn't think about the longevity of it, and they were just like, yeah, we're mad, break. And you know, that's how you lose pieces of history. That's how you, like when another example is when Hitler went and did his degenerative art. Is that what he called his museum? I think he called it Degenerative Art Museum. He took everything that wasn't his style of art and put it in an art museum as degenerate art instead of, you know, it's the same general thing we're repeating over and over and over again. If it doesn't fit your idea of the message you want to send, it's inherently wrong, and it shouldn't be. It should show you this is how they felt at that time. Like this is their history. You can't just get rid of it and it's gone. And if you get rid of it and it's gone, then we open the window for people to have that opinion in the future. And then we're in an endless cycle because people feel like they're the first people to talk about this, and they're not. But we're hiding the actual like history of that, regardless of what it's about. Even if it's about something that we like, slavery, even if it's about something we don't want to acknowledge. Like if we don't acknowledge it, that's a bigger issue.
Yes.
Than just acknowledging, hey, this happened, we're growing from it. Like you don't need to take everything down.
Yep. And that's where like the saying, we learn from our history, or history repeats itself. Because if we don't learn from our history and we aren't aware of that, we're doomed to repeat ourselves. We're doomed to do it again. And I think when we take down statues, we are removing a perspective that once existed that we need to be knowledgeable on so that we don't revert back to it. It's like, I think of it as the same way if someone has anger issues and they go to anger management classes and then they leave the anger management classes, and instead of taking that old perspective that they had and constantly making sure that they weren't going back to it and making sure that they were staying on the right path, they just completely tried to ignore that old perspective, they're going to end up right back at it. If they don't constantly look at, where was I? This was my reaction. This can no longer be my reaction. It needs to be this. They're going to end up going back to that old style.
Exactly.
And that's same thing that we're talking about here with taking
I
down
think
statues.
it puts a visual to like humans make mistakes. Like
Yes.
we as a society are going to make mistakes. And if like we're friends. If you made a mistake, it's not my job to judge you. It's my job to understand where you were coming from. And if you reach out and help and ask, I'm supposed to help you go through that because we're friends. It's the same general thing. We can't expect our past selves or our past generations or whatever to not make mistakes, but then also not hold them accountable for them.
Yeah.
Like, and that doesn't mean taking stuff down. That doesn't mean, alienating the entire idea. It's you've got to learn where they were coming from, what knowledge they didn't have that you now have, and grow with that.
Yeah, which is even more of a reason why it should almost stay up, right? Because especially like one of the major, like if you're looking for an example of like something that we're talking about, look at every Christopher Columbus statue that exists right now. Anybody who believes that statues should be torn down will point at any Christopher Columbus statue and say that that needs to be torn down because it's depicting the wrong story.
Yeah.
But really, what we should be doing is looking at, one, what actually happened, what was the real story behind that, and two, why, what allowed us to take the real story and twist that into who we idolized for so many years as Christopher Columbus, that we even have like Columbus Day out of it. How can we take that information and learn from it? And then that doesn't mean we take those statues down. That means we maybe keep it up and maybe add like a little commentary on the side of what the actual story was, instead of just leaving the statue up.
Yeah,
If
or
you're really
even
that upset.
taking it down, like say it's in a town center and people are really complaining, like, okay, fine, take it down, but put it somewhere, put it in your town hall where people can see it, put it, in a museum, put it somewhere, don't deface it, don't destroy it.
Yeah.
Put it somewhere where you can go back and still acknowledge that it existed, because if you don't, same with everything, if you don't acknowledge that something happened, you can't heal from it, you can't grow from it, because you're just saying that it's not there. Another good example of that, not the stuff getting taken down, but of just like looking back and being like, wow, if one thing was different, everything would be different, is the story of Hitler. And a lot of people don't know the story of Hitler actually, but it's actually very big in the art community. Is he was an artist. He was a really good artist.
Oh.
But the style that he liked was not the style that was it was not the art movement that was happening right now. He liked realistic, blonde girls at a beach kind of paintings. And it was modernism, postmodernism, surrealism, one of those, the almost real but not real style, like Van Gogh and them, that type of art was what was out right now. Matisse, like all that type of stuff. So he didn't fit. So he applied to go to art school in Italy, and he got rejected. And because he got rejected for art school in Italy, he went into the army and became who he became.
Oh, wow.
If he had, and then, then begs the question, if art school had accepted him, would we be admiring his artwork today instead of who he is now?
That is a really interesting perspective. And I think that is another reason why art is so important to know, and the history of art too, because that's something that I didn't know, and that gives me a lot to think about. And I'm telling you right now, I will think about that for quite some time after we get off of this, because
when I first learned about that, it completely, and I mean, it doesn't make what he did okay, it doesn't make him an okay person, but it shows that everything that happens to you makes you who you are.
Yeah.
And like one decision, one wrong thing, one mistake can change your entire being, and it depends on how you go about that, how the
Yeah,
rest of your life is, and especially healing wise, he healed by becoming an extremely violent person.
which is not a proper way to heal, by the way.
No, not a good thing.
Not a proper way to heal at all. And that's kind of more the importance. That also begs the question, do you think if he maybe took that rejection and honed that maybe more into his artistic sense, would he have been more successful there again rather than in the military too? You know
It
what I
also
mean?
begs the question of, does that actually show the type of person he was already becoming? Because the people that he painted was the same type of people that he viewed as perfect
That
later
like
on.
Aryan style.
So was he already in that mindset, but was in a more portraying it in painting, and maybe would have been more like Lenin and Marx in terms of like having a following like that, instead of what he did if he hadn't gone into the military and like that type of thing. Like, there's still a ton of different ways. I'm not saying he would have been a perfect person, but he might have been, he might have written more books and created more paintings that people then worshipped as like kind of almost like a cultism type thing instead of what he did. Like, or he could have been a completely different person. The point is, you don't know, but you can't lose that piece of history just because of what he did do.
Yeah. Yep. And I think that when we lose that piece of history, we lose a lot of knowledge and sense of perspective. And another example of that is in Webster, in Webster, Massachusetts. The one of the founding people of Webster was Samuel Slater, and not many people know this about Samuel Slater, but he introduced the water-powered cotton mill to the United States when he came here from Britain. It was one of the first sightings of the water-powered cotton mill, and it changed the textile industry in the United States from that point on. He was a major piece of the textile industry in this portion of Massachusetts. And not many people know that. But what they've recently been doing in Webster to re-educate people or bring, knowledge to that, or at least point it out to people, is they now have statues of sheeps all around Webster in front of the businesses.
Oh, that's
Because
nice. I like that.
yeah, so like the public library, the police station, I believe there's a Dunkin' Donuts that has one. There's a bunch of businesses that have sheep that they've put a statue of sheep in front of them to highlight Samuel Slater. And they also have built the Samuel Slater Museum. So you can go there and learn about the makings of, Webster and Webster, Massachusetts. But another piece of them, bringing awareness to that history was building those statues. And I think that's also the importance of having those statues, whether they're there for the right reasons. It gives us awareness, perspective, and knowledge of what was going on during specific time periods.
A good local for me story about that is, so I live in literally middle of nowhere, Georgia. Like middle Georgia, it takes an hour to get to any other major city. Like,
Oh, wow.
middle of nowhere, Georgia. In respect of that, our town hall still has a Confederate flag hanging in the front of it.
Oh, wow.
Nobody has said anything. It's not an argument, but you got to remember too, like, that was these people's legitimate history. Like, the people in this state, and especially in this town, because this town, like, people don't leave. They just don't. Like, there's whole generations that have just been here. They fought for that side, regardless of who was right, who was wrong. These people fought and lost their lives for that side of the fight.
It's part of a lot of that town's family history.
Is part of that flag, regardless of if you believe in it or not. Regardless of, yes, obviously it stands for a lot of very negative things. But people still died believing in that, and they deserve the honor of having that up.
Yeah.
You know, it still honors the people who died, regardless of what their opinion was. They still gave their life for what they believed in.
Yep. And again, whether or not it's right is an entirely different story, but they still, that level of dedication, that level of commitment, at the very least, you know, to the extent where they gave their lives, needs to be honored and valued. Just as, like, when, you know, look at it this way, when we have somebody who's maybe a Marine and they go off to a different country and they have to kill people, they're doing it for our country. Whether or not it's right, they're doing it, and it still traumatizes them, no matter what, because that's another human being at the other end that needs to be valued. And taking down those pieces of history and those pieces of art that portray that history can be extremely detrimental, in a sense that we are no longer valuing or honoring those beings, those living, breathing humans.
Yeah. And this all, you know, this all ties back to literally, you know, there's pieces of you that you may not like, there's pieces of you that you need to grow with and grow from, but it's not, you can't just repress them. Like, this is all about repressing, you know, stuff inside yourself too. Is like, yes, there's things that we do on a very major scale, but I mean, I think that shows that, you know, it is human to repress things, but we need to work on not repressing things, especially if that means, you know, healing from the trauma, healing from the past. You know, repressing stuff is just not, it's never going to help in a government standpoint, in a history standpoint, in a self standpoint. You can't repress the past, because then you're never going to learn from it. You're never going to grow. You're never going to heal. You're never going to anything.
Even if it's ugly. I mean, because especially, I mean, bringing it back to, you know, the Judith slaying, oh God, I can't remember it.
Holofernes.
Yeah, Judith, Judith slaying Holofernes. You know, her depiction was gruesome, but that's because her feelings were gruesome. Her emotions were so, you know, just almost, I want to say dark, because it is so dark what she had to go through. She had no other choice but then to portray it through her art when she was trying to pull from those emotions.
Exactly.
So.
And that's when, like, different types of art styles started coming, like, more into play, like, you know, because you would have like a Victorian era and like all this stuff, and then like you would slowly start to get more than one era at the same time, or they would kind of overlap, because people would start trying to express things in different ways, and the ways that people were expressing things would then make multiple art periods kind of happen, not simultaneously, but they would grow at the same time.
Yes.
And then they would branch off, and everybody, I think it's so important to mention too, is everybody in the art world attributes their style to somebody else. You know, like everybody's like, I was inspired by this person, I was inspired by this person. Like, you don't have to do anything by yourself. You know, like even famous artists like Van Gogh loved Matisse, for instance. Picasso loved Matisse. Lots of people loved Matisse. But, you know, there were people who didn't like certain ones, and that's why their style became different instead of, you know, the same general direction. Like, your opinions and everything make you who you are and make you your style. Like, Picasso's story is insane to me, for instance, but Picasso was one of those, like, could literally like look at the Mona Lisa and paint it exactly as it was.
Oh, wow.
And you would not know the difference of if he did it or Da Vinci did it.
Oh, wow.
Like, he could literally look at anything. He made he made cubism because he was sick of being able to do what everybody else was doing. So
he just got bored with the normal.
Like, I need to do something that like I can simplify and show that I really know art, and I really, because you look at him, like you look at his cubism paintings and you can still tell that he knows what he's talking about. He knows art, he knows the fundamentals, but he chose to do that style because he didn't want to be known for doing the same thing as everybody else.
Yeah. And it, I think it's funny that you bring up Da Vinci, because one of the things that I have like on my notes that I wanted to go over was like famous pieces of art by, like, one of them being The Last Supper by Da Vinci, the creation of Adam by Michelangelo, Madonna and Child by Duccio. Like, each of them are depictions of something that mattered to these people, especially in religion, because religion during this time period was it was almost everything, right?
And a lot of the artists only got work because churches wanted them to make pictures for them to put in the church too. Like,
Yeah.
that's how artists got their living. Was it was either really rich people who were also really religious or part of the church who wanted church depictions, or church wanting depictions. So
Yeah. Yep. And it's very powerful how much, like, those depictions have even carried over into today. I mean, we still have them hung up on like so many museums, whether or not it be like the original or like a copy. It's still something that is very prevalent in today's, age. When we're looking, I mean, everybody kind of knows Da Vinci. You can't go up to someone and say, do you know Da Vinci? And they're like, no, who's that? Almost
let me
everyone
tell you,
knows
the
Da
Mona
Vinci is an
Lisa
artist.
is extremely underwhelming.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I've seen it. Not worth it.
I've seen one of the original, I think it was Madonna and Child that I saw. I went to, I think it was Paris. Oh God, this was so many years ago at this point that I'm starting to lose my memory of it. And that's what's so sad. So
Madonna and Child is in the Louvre, isn't it? Because I think I've seen that one too.
I think
It's either in the Louvre or it's in the Musée d'Orsay.
I don't know, honestly. It's been so many years. My brain is like fried. I can't remember the names of it. But I saw it, and it's funny how there have been many different depictions of it, but all of them are pretty much the same, in a sense that as soon as he created that depiction, or as soon as the original depiction was made, everyone after that followed the same thing. And it, to me, it more highlights how perspective, once set, can kind of follow, you know what I mean? Like, you don't lose that sense of perspective unless you lose it, unless you get rid of it. If we would have burned that painting the moment that he had made it and nobody ever saw it, it would not have set that precedent for what Madonna and Child would look like then going forward.
Yeah.
The next thing that I really wanted to talk about was color psychology. And art is very powerful in this sense because
I took so many color theory classes, you have no idea.
and part of what really inspired me on this color psychology, spurt, was I was actually scrolling through Instagram and I saw an old lecture from I don't know if it was like an old college professor, or I could not find like any credentials in the like bio or in the comments, and I tried to look all over online for it and I couldn't find it. Otherwise I would definitely reference who this was by. But it was some type of teacher, and she was talking about the difference in the color red between males and females when you're trying to market to them. So what she had stated was males, when they're born, because when you're born you don't see every color, you start to develop your sense of color. And males, the first color that they typically see is of the reds. Same thing with females, but the shade is different. So the shade that they see for males has more of a blue tint, and the females have more of a yellow tint. So what this teacher was really trying to portray was, when you're marketing and your demographic is of males, if you have a color red, you want to have more of that blue tint. If you have the color red with females, you want to have more of that yellow tint, because it's more psychologically appealing to them and they're more likely to be intrigued by the item that you're selling because of that color. And that to me was very powerful, because often we think of like, oh, red is anger, energy, action, but when we think of it on like a real deep psychological level, we start to look at like, okay, different shades can actually affect different people in different ways too.
Yeah, so that's kind of funny because so when she means blue, I'm assuming she probably means a cooler tint. And then yellow is like a warmer tint because that's just how the colors work.
Yeah.
So that's just interesting because when you think about, in general, how people view the different males versus females as well, males do tend to, you always hear that males are more laid back and girls are more uptight. And then, you think like the warmer shades, so the more, active, like when you think of, protons and neutrons, the warmer they are, the more they move. That kind of gives way into that too. Like guys like the cooler, chiller
Yeah.
shades.
Which is it's very odd because I very much so am not one to play into like gender like normatives, you know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
whatever colors you want or whatever. But for me to know like the psychology behind it and see how we've kind of come up with those correlations and why we've kind of come up with those correlations can like it's just very interesting. You know what I mean?
Well, that's like the marketing of like groceries and stuff. It is minus America because I actually had this conversation with one of my color theory teachers when I was studying in Greece. Minus America because for some reason they don't do this. But everywhere else, especially Europe, every single grocery store, their logos are going to be brown, green, yellow, the natural kind of plant colors that you kind of see like, hey, everything in here is organic, everything in here is fresh. America doesn't do that. If you actually think about it, every single one of our grocery stores is red, white, and blue for the most part.
Yeah.
Market Basket, Price Chopper. There's some semblance of a red, a white, or a blue in
Stop and Shop,
9 out of 10 of our grocery stores. So for some reason, America doesn't do that. But in general, most grocery stores are going to use natural colors, not a bright red, not a bright purple. Like they're going to use colors that show, hey, everything in here is natural. And that kind of goes with.
Yeah, well, it brings me to a TED Talk that I was actually watching by Axel Buther, and it's called The Language of Color. And he basically talks about how communication between all living things exists within color. And, we identify a lot of things through color. You know what I mean? Like, that plant is good because it produces blue flowers, but that plant is bad because it produces white flowers. That's how you can tell the difference between them.
Poison frogs are always a very bright warning shade instead of dull colors.
Exactly. When we think of a peacock, when it spreads all of its, feathers, it's these bright colors, and they're all vibrant because they're meant to portray a specific image. And that's the kind of thing is it exists between all living beings, not just humans. Art and color exist between every single human and living thing. Even art being, like, if we look beyond textures, if there was a video, actually, another thing that I saw on TikTok's bad for me. There was a frog that was just sitting in a small pool of water that started to, when they do their noise, but he was doing it for a long period of time. And thus in doing that was actually sending out ripples in the water that extended out through, like, because it was a small pond of water, but it rippled out and it covered the entire area of water. And the image that it made was almost like hypnotic in a sense. And it was that frog's own form of art, and it actually was how it attracts its mate. So it was creating its own form of art to attract a mate, and it was communicating in that way. And that really highlights the importance of art and how it can help us communicate between all things. I mean, associations in color. I mean, this is traditional associations in color. If you look at different cultures or different times, there are different things, but traditionally, I mean, gray is associated with like sturdy, tasteless, boring, like concrete. So when we think of like a sturdy foundation, we think of gray for concrete. For red, we may think anger. We may think also like bright and energetic, potentially even like fruity because of like strawberries and things like that, raspberries. Even red can sometimes even mean seductive and love in a sense. You know, they all have their own things. And one, like I have a color psychology like pamphlet here by the dietitian editor, which kind of goes over like different colors and their meanings. And it's just crazy to think about how different colors just innately mean different things to us without us even thinking about it. I mean, when we think of white, if I tell you to think of white, I think of cleanliness and I think of like clean blank slate, and that's pretty much what we all think of. And maybe that's because of Mr. Clean, you know what I mean? Because he always had that white background.
But that then goes back to how advertising works.
Yes. And how marketing is literally based off of this. And that's the same thing that healing can do for you too. If we're feeling a specific energy or a specific emotion and we're almost stuck on it, sometimes embracing the color of that emotion or whatever color that makes us feel and painting or creating with that can really, really, really help us in healing or processing through that emotion. One thing I wanted to bring up when color and marketing, the importance of color is huge. The importance of color in art is huge, but the importance in color in general is huge. So when someone goes into an environment or into a new space, they determine within 90 seconds their opinion on that space. Of that opinion, 62 to 90% of that opinion is based on the color of the environment. So if I walk into a room within 90 seconds, potentially 90% of my opinion of that room is going to be formed based off of the color of that room. That's how important and effective color is, because it's going to like, it really affects us on a subconscious level to a point where we don't really understand just how much. It just kind of happens naturally because we've been conditioned to view them a certain way.
I always just thought that that was really interesting. One thing that I always remember when I first think about color and emotions and everything is actually a exercise that Miss G had us do in high school. And I don't know if do you know who Kandinsky is? The first like truly abstract painting?
I do not.
So he was the first one to make like truly abstract, not cubism, not surrealism, like straight abstract, had nothing, had no boundaries, no anything. And he has this one painting that I never remember the name of because his paintings have very interesting names since it's all abstract. There's not really like a object to connect the name with so that it sticks. But this one painting is literally just lines, circles, swirls, like all that stuff. And then Miss G showed us a video where they connected all of those lines and swirls to music.
Oh.
And then she had us all make sure we had headphones and like bring in our own music that day. And you put in a song, preferably one that didn't have any words, but you can do it to any song. And we used watercolor, but you could use anything. And you just paint what you feel in the music.
Okay.
And I've actually been asked in my therapy sessions, actually, he wants me to go in and actually try to do that with a group of, he has like a group class too, group lesson, group therapy session. He wants me to go in one day and actually see if I can do that with them. But nice. It's very interesting because you don't think, like at first you're like, this is weird, I don't know what I'm doing. And then all of a sudden it just like clicks. And you just start making these things and you're like, I don't even know where that came from. But it's like you hear these colors, you hear the colors, and you just create what you're hearing.
Yeah.
And I think that's really cool.
Yep. And I think so. Something else along the same line that my mom actually, she recently did, and she told me about, she went to this, it was an art therapy, group. And what they had her do was you took a blank piece of paper and you just made a bunch of straight lines just all over the place. You intercross them, it's a bunch of straight lines everywhere. Now what you do, every single time that one of those lines intersects and creates like a hard angle, so it's like a straight line, it basically is an angle, you take that and you curve it. So you make it a curve rather than a hard angle, and then you fill in that area. So what that does is it turns all of these harsh angles and all of this harsh emotions, and it smooths them out. It helps you to smooth them out. And what it can do is, if maybe you're angry, maybe you have a bunch of hard lines, that then when you're doing the curves, you do a very soft curve, or a very large curve, depending on your emotion, and then that can help you process things as well. And art in therapy has many different forms, and honestly, those are just two ways that they can take form.
Yeah, there's also like ink blot tests, What
Yeah.
are you looking at?
Yeah, exactly. So those are the Rorschach ink blot test, and that's used to see patterns of thought disorder. So we've used those for like a long time at this point now, where they show you an image. What do you see from that image? And then they take those patterns and they determine, okay, this is what this person potentially is facing, and it is typically associated with diagnosing bipolar disorder, because it detects irregular patterns of thought, which is what they're trying to look for in bipolar disorder. So it can be used both in holistic healing on your own, but it's also used in modern medicine as well. So another thing I wanted to bring up was its use in elderly. And we were just talking about, the use in modern medicine, and this is a large use of it in modern medicine, is elderly people who are exposed more to art therapy. It's been known to slow down the loss of brain cells and help with memory and brain function. Also, the use of actually doing stuff with your hands, whether it be crafting something, drawing something, that can aid in arthritis, muscle and joint pain, and so many other things, just having to do with rejuvenating the body and making it young again.
Another thing that reminds me of is that every doctor who wants to be a surgeon has to take an art class, because it teaches them those fine motor skills with your fingers and your hands that you wouldn't learn otherwise.
I did not know that.
Yep, everybody who wants to be a surgeon, at least it used to be that way. I'm not sure if they changed it recently, but when I was in high school, that was the thing.
That makes
every
sense.
doctor that wanted to be a surgeon has to take an art class, because the drawing and like the painting and all that type of stuff, it just teaches fine motor skills that's very hard to learn otherwise from not a creative standpoint. So.
Yep. And it very much so makes sense. I mean, even babies, you know what I mean? We use art to help babies learn dexterity. You hand a kid crayons and a piece of paper, when they first pick it up, they're never in the lines, you know what I mean? They're everywhere. They just draw all over the page. They grip it like it's like the hand of God, and then they just start swiping all over the paper. But they do that for so long, for so many years, they gain that dexterity. Well, now they become a professional artist at that point. You know what I mean? It varies so heavily. And that's just one of the things about art, is it truly is universal. It can be used all the way from babies to, an elderly person pretty much on their deathbed. You know what I mean? It's all encompassing, and it can help everyone, from memory function to emotional, like repairing, to dexterity, to, avoiding arthritis. There's just so many benefits to art. So I had a couple of questions that I wanted to ask just as like a food for thought. And this is something that I want my podcast listeners to think about as well. Because these are things on our daily lives or our societal level that we kind of really need to think about. And one of which is, since art is so essential, because I can, confidently say that throughout our conversation, we have established a good foundation as to why art is so essential to our daily lives and our well-being and mental health. Why is it that as adults we often stray from these practices?
I think it's because as an adult, we all get society has just pointed us away from anything creative. They think the same thing with professional artists as they think about when you want to be a professional musician. It's not a consistent 9 to 5.
Yeah.
And therefore it's not conducive to having a successful career, because you don't have a set schedule. You don't have a set clientele, a set base of anything really. It's such more of like a freelance option that people just, we're told when we're like 12, 13, stop pretending when we say we want to be astronauts or everything. And I feel like that kind of is the same thing. It kind of kills your creative juices. Like you really gotta, because then if you're the kid that still wants to be an astronaut, you're weird. You didn't grow up. It's viewing creative or adventurous careers is always been sort of taboo. Like it's something kids want. It's not something adults want. And if you want that, then you're immature, you're young, you haven't decided yet. You'll change your mind eventually. That's a hobby. That's not something people do for a living.
Yeah, I mean, which is crazy, because then we also simultaneously then rely on these things, right? I mean, who doesn't go a week without music? And it doesn't, everybody listens to music, and that's a form of art, and it's so looked down at as a career unless you're extremely successful right off the bat. Unless you've been introduced as a successful artist, you will almost never be viewed as successful in that person's eyes, because of the way that we've been conditioned to view art and its importance for us. It's not important until it is.
One of the things I always say is like all those notebooks that you think are really cute with all the designs on them, all the little journals, like somebody designed that.
Yeah.
When you go to a resort, a hotel, and you look at the pictures to figure out if you want to go there or not, somebody took those.
Yeah. Yep. And even all those stock images that we see, right? We're like, oh, that's just a stock image. Somebody took that stock image.
Exactly.
Somebody took that. And it once wasn't a stock image. It was once an image that was magnificent to be able to see, and everybody loved it so much that it got so popular it became a stock image. It's all about our perspective on that. Which then leads me to my next question that, again, I want my viewers and us to think about. Do you believe that we have been conditioned to only appreciate certain forms of art, or to appreciate some forms of art more than others?
Oh yeah, 100%.
Yeah, and do you think that this can also create a challenge when people are trying to use art to heal, as they already have a predisposed bias towards something that could be beneficial to them?
Yes. So even myself, I think we are extremely conditioned to, not even just in art, but in general, is if you're not the best, you shouldn't be doing it, is kind of the mindset that everybody has kind of gotten. If you're not the best, if you can't make money off of it, if you can't, if people don't think you are the new thing, then it's pointless.
Yeah.
We have strayed away from being able to do things because it makes you happy. Like you always have to have a means to an end when you're doing something. Like I can't tell you how many times people, like even myself, there's a couple groups on Facebook that are like art shaming groups, like craft shaming groups. And because somebody is posting something and trying to sell it, they are giving them absolute hell because they're charging too much or it's not at a level that you should be selling it. You need to be practicing a little bit more. And I think that's pointless. I think it's rude. If nobody buys it, that's one thing. Like, but who cares? You're putting it out there, you're happy with it. If you weren't happy with it, you wouldn't be putting it out there. And that should be all that matters. But instead, everybody is so convinced that if you're not absolutely fantastic right from the get-go, that it's a bad time. And I struggled with that a lot right when I graduated because I went to school with so many amazing things. And I think that's a problem with art school in general too, is you are forced to critique everybody else. So then you start critiquing yourself because you're forced to start looking for things that people are going to critique.
Yeah.
And take everybody's critique. So then when you are out and you're not in art school anymore and you don't have those group critiques, you don't have everybody like ripping you a new one because they're trying to get you as far along in your progress as possible before you leave, you start doing it to yourself. So the year after I graduated, I didn't take pictures for a good 6 months because all of a sudden I wasn't good enough anymore. I felt like I wasn't growing enough. And I really had to take time, away from social media, away from everything to really remind myself that I did this because I love this, not because anybody else asked me to, not because I needed anybody else's approval. Like, I did this because I love it. And everybody who's ever had to work with me, because I am trying to do it in a professional standpoint, has never had anything bad to say. But I've had so much criticism for myself that it physically caused my work to suffer because I got so caught up in that I need to be better than XYZ instead of just I need to be myself, which is a really big, thing in society. Like I said, if you're not perfect, it's not worth it. And that's not true.
Yeah, and that is such a detriment to us in general, right? Because we can use art to heal just for ourselves, even if we're not artists trying to put things out there. If we're just trying to use art to heal, we're now limited on that because we've been conditioned to view it as like a childish thing, or if you're not perfect, you shouldn't do it, which is not the case with art. You know what I mean? Like, I explicitly remember when I was a kid, when I had a room where all I wanted to do was just take 3 or 4 different colors, just take a paintbrush and just splatter it all over the wall. But I wasn't allowed to do that because it was too messy and it wouldn't look right. And it would be hard to cover up after. So instead, I had to pick one color and we added an accent to a wall, but it had to be this, perfect, this, put together thing, when really I just wanted color everywhere. So that form of healing, of just being free and splashing things around, I then wasn't allowed to harness and just, sit with, because it was viewed as childish and it was viewed as messy, when really it's only because the person who told me no was conditioned to view it as messy, and they were conditioned to view it as a not so adult thing to put on a wall.
Exactly. Or even my parents, my dad was insistent, be a doctor and then you can paint on the side. And I believed him. So I tried to go into a medical field, and 2 years into it, I went to Greece to study abroad, and I was doing an art minor then. So I did my art minor in Greece. And halfway through that, I was like, I can't go back and do this. I can't go back and do this, this medical field. And I dropped out when I got back. And then I waited a year and I went back to school. And at that point, my parents were so happy that I was going back to school, they didn't care what I was doing. And that was kind of my way of breaking that, I guess. Yeah. And I mean, I don't recommend to do that. There's a lot less understanding parents out there that would probably really not have a good time with that. But, I had to tell myself, you know, I have to break through this. I have to be myself. I have to do what makes me happy. Like, regardless of where I end up, I'd rather have my degree in something that makes me happy and something that I genuinely enjoyed learning about than doing something for the sake of everybody else wanting me to do it.
Yep, exactly. And that actually is a perfect segue to probably one of my like last questions. I have one or two more, but how has art helped you heal, and what forms of art? Because for me, I don't necessarily like drawing, and I don't necessarily like painting, but when it comes to like designing things or like personal decor, or like house decor, I know it's not art, but
It's art.
it is, it's aesthetically pleasing to me, and that is where I enjoy it. And I know, like, when I don't like something in the house, or like when I'm having a really hard time mentally, I tend to start cleaning and start like I have been known to pick up like white paint just so I can paint over like door frames, because I don't like the way that the door frames look, and I don't like they're old. This house was built in like the 1600s, so it's like it's old. So there's stuff that is different colors on the wall, and I don't like that, so I'll paint over it. That's how I like to heal, because I like everything to be aesthetically pleasing for me. But how do you heal? How does it work with you?
So, this is actually kind of a funny story. So I actually thought there was something wrong with me when I realized this pattern. So I would go and talk to my therapist, and I would be like, I just have this thing where like I'll be really into like this audio book or this whatever, and then I'll get specifically the specific time I'm mentioning right now is I was like super into, I found this mythology book that tells all of the Greek mythology stories, but modern language, so that you can like very easily follow along instead of like every 5 seconds being like, I don't know what that word means.
Let me look it up. Yeah.
And I like binged it in like binged the whole series in probably about a week, and they're 15-hour audiobooks.
Oh wow.
And I just was listening to it all the time, and then I got all these different painting ideas from, it's actually where my Etsy page kind of started off with, was all this mythology based type of thing. And then, I wanted to paint Medusa, so I had to paint a snake first to make sure I could paint a snake. And it just kind of went off from there. And then I got those paintings done, and I never picked up a mythology book again for a little while. And
wow.
You're conditioned to believe that like that type of thing, that type of behavior is extremely chaotic. It's not correct. There's something wrong with you. And so I like full on went to my therapist expecting him to tell me that I was like developing OCD or something. And he was like, you literally sound like an artist. Like, you get inspired by something, you milk it for all it's worth, and then you move on to the next thing. Yeah. And ever since then, I kind of realized that that's what I do. I get weird subjects that just get stuck in my head, and I won't be able to relax or move on until I make something from it. And then once I make something from it, then I can move on to the next thing. So I don't have a really big, like, I have a style, I guess, but it's more of like how my stuff is created versus what they look like, because I can go from like really bubbly cute paintings to like stuff that you're like, what is going on in your brain that you made that? Like, that should only be hung up in Halloween type paintings.
Yeah.
So but it really is like, I'll just get these random spurts, and it always happens when I'm going through something and I feel really low, and depression is like getting really bad again. My brain will be like, let's focus on something and exploit it, basically, and then once you do that, you'll feel better. So it's like I find something that can inspire me for the time being to remind me that like, hey, I can do this. This is what I do. And then I make what I want to make, and then I'm fine and I feel better and I go about my day, and then it falls into the same pattern.
And it reminds me of because when I was studying astrology, and I'm constantly studying astrology, I'm listening to some sort of podcast or reading some sort of book, but when I was studying astrology, one of the main things for Aries that people often associate with them is like aggression and anger, and also like assertiveness. And part of that is only because it stems from a place of needing to purge in the now. And what that was related to was like when you have a child, like a 2 or 3 year old, and they get flooded with such heavy emotion that they have a tantrum. They throw themselves on the ground, they flail their arms around, they yell, they scream, they get every bit of that emotion. They milk every bit of that emotion that they can, referring it back to like what you said. And then 5 minutes later, they forget about it like nothing happened. It's
Yeah,
because
that's how I am. I get an overflux of emotion, and then I have to make something, and then I'm okay.
yes, it's like filling up a pitcher, pouring out that pitcher, and now it's good to start again. You know, you fill it up, it comes to a point where it starts to overflow. Okay, now you use that pitcher for something. Okay, now it's empty and you can use it again. It can start to build up again. And that's kind of the same way as it can take all of those built up emotions, all of those pent up things, and it can help you purge and expel them into a physical thing in this world so that you can then get rid of it.
It's in the painting. It's in the paint. It's in the water. It's in the image that you make. It's literally, and you like, I zone out specifically. I literally have this thing where it's very hard for me to start a painting and stop and then start it again the next day. There's very few paintings that I have been able to do that. Most of the time, I start it when I know that I have unlimited time, like I have the next day off or whatever, because I tend to get these spurts at like 10 o'clock at night. Yeah. I will literally, I have to finish it. Like there's this weird thing in me that I will not be able to put this thing down until it's done.
You have to expel it.
Doesn't matter how long. Exactly.
Yep. It's you can't sit there and harness and sit with that emotion and that thought or that energy. You have to get it out and onto a piece of paper. And that's like literally that embodies the healing energy of art in like one statement, is purging built up emotion or energy into a physical manifestation so you can get rid of it or you can process it, and you know what I mean? And exactly. It is similar to reopening that wound, but when you reopen that wound, you got to get rid of all of it. You know what I mean? If you only put half of that emotion onto a piece of work or half of your emotion onto that piece of paper or whatever art you're creating, it's not going to fully purge it, and you're going to have to readdress it again. So, that being said, what are some resources people can go to for art therapy or healing with art? So some people may be able to go to an actual art therapist, because art therapists do actually exist. But I'm also, part of the reason I'm doing this is because access to free resources is limited. So what free resources can people use that you know of? If you know of any.
To be honest, I use Pinterest a lot, not just for like scrolling, whatever, but if I have an idea in my head or I have something that I need to get out, any sort of keyword you type in, something's gonna pop up. Like I use it for references and stuff, but I also, you know, as you pin stuff on Pinterest, more stuff will come up relating to that.
Yep.
So I find that when I get into little spurts, my spurts of like, I need to make this, it's always of a specific thing, but I can never entirely picture it myself. So then if I go through and I look at all these different paintings that people have done, you know, videos, like any of that type of stuff, like art comes from everywhere and nowhere at the same time. So like, yeah, you can go to an art therapist, you can go to, you know, you can talk to your friends, you can go to all these like fancy websites, but honestly, I think the easiest way to start art therapy is to just buy a sketchbook and a pencil and just see what happens.
Yeah. I mean, even if you don't, if you can't get a sketchbook, even just like a regular notepad lined paper, it's not like ideal. Even scrap paper, like,
Yeah, like anything. You can get a bag of scrap paper from Walmart for $3, and it's these little tiny, cute little colored pieces of paper, and they're all different textures. They're all different. So even that, if you're a very texture-driven person, like just having those and being like I know when I'm having a bad day, I will literally take them out and organize them as like texture or color or whatever, like just to feel like I'm in control of something. But literally, like in terms of art, you can do anything. You can bullet journal. That's a form of art. I love those. I can't do them. I can't sit there and pay attention for that long. But scrapbooking, like there's so many random things that you can do. Those people who just take a page in a sketchbook, cut out random colored pieces of paper and make a picture with it. Like art therapy is really whatever you make it. There's not really set resources because everybody has a different way of going about it. So it's kind of just, if you see a kind of weird painting on TikTok that you want to try to do it. If you've never painted before, but it looks cool, give it a shot. I did that the other day. I can't sculpt to save my life, and I tried to sculpt an octopus legs on a canvas and then paint an octopus, and it looks like crap, and I hate it. But I tried it, and I feel better because I tried it.
Yeah, and the other thing too is like I know YouTube has a lot of resources. You can look up art therapy. Oh, I love that. If you want, I don't know if you want, you can send me a picture of that and I can put that up on the YouTube version for the visual version. So for those of you who want to see what that actually looks like, it'll be on the YouTube version. The YouTube version, it's not going to have the actual video of us, but what it will have is basically transitions and images of what we're referring to. So when we were going over the artwork, that's going to have those pieces of art up there, as well as Becca's art at the end, so you can see what specific piece she was referring to. Now
it's not my usual style. I just did it.
Yeah. But that's the beauty of art therapy, is just doing it. Sometimes is all you need to do, is just to
exactly
get it
like
out
you
there.
see something, like if you're scrolling through TikTok and you're like, oh my god, I've never tried that before, but that looks really fun. Try it.
Yes.
Find some way to try it. That's really all. That's all art is. I took a whole class called aesthetics where it was literally just what is art. It was this philosophy class, and it was like the most eye-opening, interesting class I've ever taken in my life.
I always love philosophy classes because like you think they're going to be something and then they're entirely different and you're like, I wasn't expecting this at all. So
well, that, and it's fun. Like if you can prove your point, you can't be wrong.
Yeah,
like that's what I like about it. You physically can't be wrong if you can prove what you're talking about.
That's true. That's true. And that it's funny that you say that, because a lot of, and this is just us going off on a tangent, but it's funny because in astrology, a lot of people have skepticism about astrology. And then as soon as I give them their chart analysis, they're like, oh my God, because they start to see the planets, and then they start to see the signs and how they interact, and then they start to see, okay, well, this planet interacts with this one, and that's why I really don't like people when they try and give me orders. It's they start to see those little tiny bit of nuances, and given that evidence, they're like, oh God, this is like actually real now. And they just kind of need that evidence in front of them. And that's part of the reason why, even if you don't believe in art therapy right now, you should just try it, because just jumping in, you may learn like, oh my God, this is what I've needed all of these years to finally expel like this pent up energy. And
you don't even have to go into it being like, this is art therapy. Like if you're one of those people that's like, I don't know, the word therapy freaks me out.
Yeah.
Just draw something, just paint something, just make something. Yep. And it could be like exactly what you needed. There's no set boundaries for art, and that's why art therapy can literally be anything you need it to be. Like just sitting there and sketching because you're bored. Like you're handling your bored emotion by using art, which is in itself a form of art therapy.
Exactly. And part of art therapy, and we've said this a few times and you just said it as well, is it's different for everyone. And what's going to work for you may not work for your spouse, it may not work for your kid, it may not work for your friend, but it probably there's something in art therapy that works for you in some way, shape, or form, whether it be watching someone do art. I know when I'm scrolling through Instagram and then I see someone making art on Instagram like sped up, I will sit there for like, probably I've sat through like a 12-minute one before, and that for me is like a lot to sit there and watch somebody draw for 12 minutes, but it was
I
just
go down a
therapeutic for
hole.
me.
Once I
Yeah.
see one of those, I need more.
Yeah, it's therapeutic because your brain likes it. It's satisfying. And sometimes, if that's what you need to do to escape, that's much healthier than running to a bottle of tequila or vodka. You know what I mean? And coming from personal experience, having the option of running from the vodka and then running to the, more um, healthy form of it, you feel a lot better with yourself running to the healthier form because you're like, okay, I did this, I took the time that I needed, I'm okay now, and I can move on with my day, rather than, being left with the consequences of the negative choices that you make. So with that, I want to thank all of my listeners, and I hope all of you have a healthy, abundant week. And as always, good health to all of my energetic beings.